online. So a welcome to those of you joining us virtually today as well. My name is Sonja van Rensen, and I have the pleasure of moderating the next 2 hours or so for you. I've been an energy and climate reporter in Brussels for many years, and I recently joined a small news agency called Carbon Pulse over the summer as their head of strategy, so their chief strategy officer. We write a lot about carbon markets, but increasingly, inevitably, we find ourselves writing about compliance options and things like industrial decarbonization and what happens to an industry like cement in light of the EU ETS and a need to get to net zero. So the program today, I'm going to hand over in a moment to CEMBUREAU's president to give you a proper welcome. After that, we're going to have a one-on-one interview of half an hour or so with Pascal Canfin, who joins us from the European Parliament. We'll try and make some time for 1 or 2 rounds of questions towards the end of that. Questions can be, well, physically, you can put up your hand. We have a few microphones. And those of you joining us virtually, you can send in questions via Slido as well. So if you're joining us virtually, you'll see a Q&A box on your screen. Put in your question there, and it'll come through to me up here. And like I say, we'll try and incorporate as many of those questions as we can. And after the interview with Pascal, we've got a panel. We've got 5 speakers, an array of perspectives, of course, and we'll have about an hour and a half for that. So once again, we've got a couple of topics we want to talk through, but we will make time for your questions, so please do send those in, and we'll break out for a few physical rounds of questions here as well. Today's event is being recorded, so if you want to rewatch any of it or supplement your notes, you can do so. I think that's it for me. I'd like to welcome Ken McKnight, President of CEMBUREAU, to officially open.
Good morning, everyone. Can't believe it's a whole year since we were here, Sonja. The year's flown by, and obviously quite a lot has happened, right? And I know in preparation for this event, there were a few things that you wanted me to reflect upon about where are we going with industrial decarbonisation. There were a number of things that have happened this year that I think have been quite significant. If we talk about the Antwerp Declaration and we talk about the Leyen and Draghi reports, they were significant events in themselves, right? And maybe I just set the scene for that. I know it's the first question you had there, right? I think all those 3 events were hugely significant events in their own right. Well, for me, there was sort of it's almost like a wake-up call, I think, for the European institutions in many ways, right? And there's a common thread, I think, running through all 3 of those particular events. It's really Europe needs to get a better balance between its climate policy, its energy sufficiency, and its competitiveness. Now, we know the Green Deal is here, and Fit for 55 is here, so we're not revisiting any of that. But I think it's really now, what we say, the rubber hits the road, and these things now have to be implemented. And we've got to figure out who's going to pay for all this and how we're going to get it done and get it done quickly. In terms of what we hope to expect over the next 5 years or so, I think the first thing is we're expecting the Commission President to deliver on her promise that she would deliver a clean industrial deal inside the first 100 days or so of this Commission. I know if she commits to something, she'll do it. So that, doing my sums up, should be sometime in January, I guess, all being well, if we get that done. But I was interested, I was looking back through what she actually said when she made that commitment, and I'm going to read just literally 2 sentences, if you bear with me, right? She said, and these are her words, not mine, by the way, right? She said, "Our full focus will be on supporting and creating the right conditions for companies to reach our common goals. This means simplifying investment and ensuring access to cheap, sustainable and secure energy supplies and raw materials." So in terms of what we expect to happen next, we expect to see that. I think also what we're looking forward to is the Accelerator Act for decarbonisation. I mean, we're not quite sure of the timing of that, but that again will be a key bit of legislation which will really help the industry achieve its decarbonisation targets, right? But I think whether it's the Accelerator Act or the Clean Industrial Deal, there are a number of things that need to happen here now and need to happen fairly quickly that need to be addressed. if we're going to achieve what we all want. First is dealing with the whole issue of permitting. The current process is just too slow, it's too cumbersome, and it goes at a snail's pace. There's too many objections. We just can't seem to get stuff fast-tracked fast enough if we're going to get to try and achieve our targets in the time frame. I think the other thing we need to look forward to is, and need to work on, is greater cross-border collaboration on energy, on hydrogen, on CO2 infrastructure. As the President said, and the bit I quoted her there, we need to make sure that we have security of energy supplies. That's critical, especially in an industry that's going to use more and more green electricity as we decarbonise. And then I would call out two other things that are absolutely essential for us. One is the carbon border adjustment mechanisms, the so-called CBAM. We're going through this transition phase at the moment. It becomes real in January 2026. That must be watertight. We signed up to this. We signed up for the end of our free allocations on the basis that this would be watertight. And if it's not watertight, we're open to circumvention, we're open to cheating, we're open to fraud. It means our industry will be seriously compromised in terms of its competitiveness. And that just totally destroys the business case for the investment, any sort of investment. So CBAM has to be watertight. And then there's money. It all comes down to money in the end, funding. There are a number of funds already there available to us. So I'm thinking of the Innovation Fund and others. The Innovation Fund is hopelessly oversubscribed and massively bureaucratic. And what we've suggested to the Commission, and we don't like just to keep coming with our problems, we like to come with some solutions, is that the revenues that this industry will put into the ETS between, I think, now and 2034 is something like 80 to 100 billion. And what we've suggested to the Commission is that 75% of that should be ring-fenced and put into a separate cement decarbonation fund. And I suppose the last point I would make in terms of expectations is that we'd like to see more coordination, both horizontally, between the different DGs and the Commission to make sure we have consistency when it comes to rules being applied, and also vertically between the EU and member states. So a lot to look forward to. I don't know if those are expectations or hopes, Sonia, but that's what we see playing out over the next 5 years or so.
Thank you for that. At least one follow-up, so that's clear your expectations, and we're at the start of a new political mandate, so it makes a lot of sense to have those. But what's next in terms of what industry's going to do?
Well, I think what needs to happen next is we all need to be on the same page, all the various stakeholders. I mentioned the word collaboration. It comes out over and over again. I think the them and us Punch and Judy show that went on for many years between industry and the Commission, the rules and objections, everybody not really aligned. I think we've moved on from that. We are fully aligned now. We now need to get stuff done. I mean, what we've done recently is we've updated our roadmap. That's our route to net zero in 2050. And our original roadmap was published, I think, about 4 years ago. And we decided to update it because technology has moved on. And also, there's a huge number of projects in our sector coming forward for decarbonisation. In fact, I would encourage anybody that hasn't done so to look at our CEMBUREAU website, look at our innovation map, and you can see all these projects listed there, right? So what needs to happen next is we need to deliver these projects, right? And if I go back to the roadmap, our roadmap is based on what we call the 5 Cs. So that's, I hope I get this right, clinker to cement to concrete to construction to carbonisation. At each stage there, we identify certain levers that can be pulled to help us decarbonise, and we use a combination of existing technology and breakthrough technologies and business models to get there. So it's going to take, a team effort to get those projects delivered, but that's what needs to happen next. We need to really make sure that we do get alignment and we do keep everybody focused on the objective here. 2 last points then. One is our customers. I mean, our customers are demanding low carbon products because they want to build more sustainably, and of course we all support them in that. But I think we really have to listen carefully to what they're saying to make sure we actually get the products to them what they actually want. And then we've got to take that feedback into the whole area of green procurement and the review of the standardization process, right, to make sure we actually create what I would call lead markets for these low carbon products going forward. And the last thing, I know Pascal is here, so this is for you, right? We got to help the regulator get this done, right? And there are a number of ways that we're doing this. If I go back to CBAM, we are holding one-to-one discussions and training, if you like, with national customs authorities to make sure that the CBAM rules are effectively applied. When it comes to carbon capture and storage, we're working with all the actors right across the whole value chain. So I'm thinking of transport and storage people, that we help them build their business case for the investment. And then if you look at some of the initiatives that the EC takes itself, or the Union does, or the Commission does, like the Levels Initiative, which was all about life cycle assessment of the performance of buildings. We have correct me, I think 3 projects we put there for assessment. So I'll say it's all part of the teamwork effort to try and get this moving, because we all want the same objective here at the end of the day, and the clock is ticking.
Okay. Maybe a final thought. So a lot of this is going to require technology, it's going to require investment, it's going to require new assets, new infrastructure. I guess that's what we spend a lot of time talking about. It's also going to require new people, or at least retrained people, if not completely new people. Is that part of your, is that on your radar? Well,
I think I'm glad you asked that question, because I think the people part of this sometimes gets ignored, right, or doesn't get enough attention. I mentioned Europe needs to focus on competitiveness and growth, but it also needs to focus on social inclusion. And there is this growing perception of inequality out there, so we've got to bring our workforce with us. And maybe I would just call out 3 things on that. One is communication. Our workforce should know in advance what we're doing in decarbonisation, and importantly, what it means for them. And we want them to be ambassadors for cement and concrete going forward. We also need to look at the whole aspect of training, move away from process engineering type topics to digitalization and new processes like that. That will require upskilling and reskilling of the workforce. And then, I think at the end of the day, we've got to address the skills shortage. There's a trade skills shortage everywhere. You can't get drivers, can't get electricians, can't get mechanics. We need better coordination between universities and colleges and industry to try and bridge that gap. And I think we need to do some things together with our workforce, and this is my last point. I'm delighted to see that CEMBUREAU have linked up on a project with one of the big European trade union, the European Federation for Builders and Woodworkers, on a project really looking at what the future needs for the workforce will be going forward, and what are the policy asks of our politicians. So I think it's a partnership like everything. We've got to bring them with us.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. A round of applause for Ken. Okay, thank you very much. That, I think, very nicely sets the scene and just the sheer breadth of challenges ahead of us. I'd like to welcome Pascal Canfin to join me up here. You can stand, sit, as you
like.
As you wish.
Okay.
We haven't got that long, so we could start standing. So Pascal is with the Renaissance Party, the Renew Group in the European Parliament. He's just been re-elected, sits on the Environment Committee, was previously its chair, was also part of the previous Parliament. And, well, formerly did a number of things in life, including heading up WWF in France, for example, so has a long-standing interest in, in things that ultimately relate to the Green Deal, environment, and, well, a future climate-neutral, competitive Europe. So we're at the start of a new cycle, refreshed and fully ready to go. There was a huge amount of legislation proposed and passed last time round in the last 5 years. I think of Fit for 55, and then unexpectedly we had things like Repower EU. All of this was part of, laying the foundations of the Green Deal. We have the Green Deal. We have a new commission in the making. We have a new emphasis on security and competitiveness alongside the net zero ambition. So I guess my opening question would be, what's next for the Green Deal in this new context? And what are the key legislative challenges that you see ahead for the next couple of years?
Yes. Can you hear me well? Apparently, yes. Okay, fine. So first, good morning. Happy to start this new mandate with you, because as we recalled minutes ago with some participants, I participated in 2019 to your, let's say, bureau or something like that, a meeting where we started designing the Green Deal. mentioning CBAM, not only CBAM, of course, reform of ETS and so on. So it's good that 5 years later, we meet again, not only, of course, for you to listen to me, but for me to listen to you, because very clearly we need dialogues, obviously. So, of course, my office is open, and we have already set a meeting to go into more details in the coming days and weeks, mainly also to discuss the implementation of CBAM 5455 and so on. So if I take the broad picture, I would say that one of the first thing that will come is, as you said, the Clean Industrial Deal. 100 days remains to be seen if it's the 100 days of the President or the 100 days of the Commission, which of course does not lead to the exact same timing. But what I can tell is that the 3 people in the Commission directly in charge, of course, as you know, there are a lot of things that will be dealt with a lot of commissioners, but still, there are 3 commissioners mainly in charge of designing and delivering the Clean Industrial Deal. It's Stéphane Séjourné, Teresa Ribera, and Wopke Hoekstra. Which is good is that they belong to 3 different parties. So as soon as we have a deal, we have a broad deal within the Commission, and we have potentially a broad deal also in the Parliament. So I hope that this Clean Industrial Deal will be an opportunity to make things more stable and less polarized. And that's first message, that one of the main risks we are facing is polarization around these topics that will bring unpredictability. And the worst thing for you is unpredictability, for your investment, for your business cycle, for your business relationships, and so on and so on. So we need to give you predictability. Then, of course, we need to give you rules that can be operated within, but first is predictability. And I hope that the Clean Industrial Deal will be a good opportunity to converge different views and to have a clear compromise, and then we deliver. What could be the key principles, the key keywords of this Clean Industrial Deal? I would say first, level playing field. Of course, I'm not going to prioritize them because all of them are important. First, level playing field. That's what you said. You cannot operate in a situation where you have a carbon price and it will be growing with the free allocations reductions, and at the same time, no real mechanism in place to counter that, for sure. That's why I've been for the very beginning a very strong supporter of CBAM. Also, in the export dimension, for some industries, it is also very important. So happy to discuss in very detailed way how you think CBAM is working, not working enough, in the dialogue with the Commission, with the national authorities, and so on and so on. My door will be always open to make it work. And the level playing field, of course, it's not only CBAM, but for your industry, it's CBAM one of the best tools we have. Second, I would say, and you mentioned that as well, financing. And when it comes to financing, I like your idea about the fact that we should look at the revenues that will come from the ETS and to do something out of it. There are various options, but it's a clear pot, a coming pot. And when you look at what the Japanese are doing, that could be an option, of course, to be discussed, expertise, and so on, but it's something that should be dynamic on this front. Second, innovation fund. You mentioned it. I think clearly, and it's very true in your business, it's not only, it could be about breakthrough innovation, but it's not only about breakthrough innovation. What we need is scaling up things that we know how to do, but too costly, too little, too not fast enough, and so on. So we need to scale up. And that's why we have been advocating in the Parliament the reform of the Innovation Fund to a net zero fund, which is very close to what you said about Decarbonisation Fund. It's still the Innovation Fund, but we managed to change a bit the rules. The Innovation Fund works, and that's why I think there is, and there will be more and more space for support from the investment fund that are not only on pure breakthrough innovation, but are more on the space of scale up, not only CapEx, but also OpEx, and so on and so on. So a clear shift within the governance and the priorities and the way the innovation fund operates. And we are talking about a lot of potential money for you. Third, and another keyword, I would say is, I don't know if it applies directly for you or if it's more other industries to be discussed, it's more de-risking. I mean, what we are facing is that we know how to do. We have plenty of technologies from battery to electrolyzers to whatever. We know how to do it, but it's a bit more risky. So is it a counterparty risk? Is it a value chain risk? Is it a sourcing risk? Is it whatever? There are risks here and there that should be guaranteed, decreased, shared, and so on. And that's the core of what we should be doing more, having a clear economy-wide, when it comes to decarbonization, de-risking strategy, looking very clearly value chain per value chain, technology per technology, where are the risks we have to de-risk, both from the private and the public side. And that's where the experience of what we have in the Juncker Fund decades ago could be built on to have more de-risking strategies, more de-risking tools. And that's the core of one word coming from what you said about von der Leyen's speech, is the EU Competitiveness Fund. So what is it about? It will likely be about more de-risking mechanisms for you in order to, again, share the risk once, of course, objectivized. Maybe a last keyword will be addition of solution. Addition of solution. That's what you said. It's a combination of solutions. Too often in the EU, it's true for the energy sector with nuclear. It's true for CCUS in the past. It's true for hydrogen and so on. We are champions to fight each other to design the only way that could be the right way forward. I mean, it's completely absurd. We need, on the contrary, we need to hedge ourselves. So there are various technologies. There are various ways to get it. Let's add up solutions, and we will see what works. And then it's competition, and then you have the losers, you have the winners, but at least we kick off and we start at speed, at scale. So that's why depolarization, adding up solutions, also within your value chain and your business, you have more disruptive technologies on clickers, you have CCUS, you have different technologies. It's not either or. It's not either or. Otherwise, we will never make it. Or we put all our solutions into one basket. And if this basket does not deliver, then we fail. So it's absurd. So let's add up solutions that would also much easier, much easier from a political standpoint to handle, instead of having to choose between A and B. Because then it's economically a bit stupid, but politically much more difficult. Instead of having A, B, C, D, and then the winner will win, or the winners will win. That's market economy. So a few keywords here to try to design the spirit of what we could expect, I think, from the Clean Industrial Deal. And of course, being very close to the three commissioners I mentioned, I would be very happy to discuss the design later on with their team and with you of the Clean Industrial Deal.
Okay, thank you. Maybe follow up one of those points, ETS revenues. So you said you obviously opened, there's various ideas out there. You mentioned what Japan is doing is interesting. Can you say anything more at this stage about what you think might work? I mean, CEMBUREAU has a specific proposal. They're going to spend 80 to 100 billion of front-loading 75% of those revenues into a dedicated fund that would be reserved for the sector. Is that an option that works from your perspective?
I would say first simplification. I mean, with the existing pot of money, it is sometimes so complicated that you don't even access the money. I take one example. It's probably not core for you and your business. Just Transition Fund for coal industries, for coal regions. It's not a small topic in some countries. the amount of money really spent for real under the Just Transition Fund pot is 2%. 2%. So, I mean, there is no point in negotiating additional money for the Just Transition Fund. So let's start disbursing it, okay? Not just for the sake of disbursing, but making sure that in real life we support concrete projects. So that's the first thing. I mean, simplifying to make things happening for real. Second, regarding the idea of front-loading. I think it's something we should clearly look at very carefully. So of course, once you front load, it means that you use money that you're not going to get later on because you have already used it. So of course, we have to monitor that kind of risk, and we have to discuss with you what you are ready, what's the level which is relevant now to invest now and not later. But also maybe to keep part, as you said, part of it for later, because at the end of the day, it's not the end of the road in X years' time. So we need to look at it carefully, but positively. And I'm really sure that from the EP standpoint, I mean, in a transparentism approach, we should be able to support that principle of front-loading ETS revenues, and then, of course, technically to be discussed where we put the right balance.
Okay, I've got a lot more questions. I'm going to try and be selective to give some time to you. You mentioned you started off with level playing field, and you mentioned CBAM, obviously, in that context. We're going to probably have a revision of CBAM in this mandate. Yeah. What for you needs to be in that revision?
So I would say first, before the revision, it's the dialogue with the national authorities, with us, with the Commission, to make sure it works. And as a reminder, in the existing text, before reviewing it, in the existing text, we have an anti-fraud or anti-circumvention article provision. So please use it and help us to use it, okay? Because of course we need to have your analysis of, okay, this company, this country, what this is circumventing the spirit and the letter. Now it's the spirit and the letter. So we have, I think, a good provision to counter this risk, but of course, it's up to us now to use it, if needed. Second, what we have already decided, and it will be part of the review, is the extension to downstream products. Okay, so it's very important for some industries, like cars, maybe aeronautics. We will see. It's now under assessment by the Commission. But of course, it is something which, as a principle, we already agreed that there will be extension of CBAM to downstream products and value chains. So at least these two elements are key to make it work. And the third one is how do we treat the highly sensitive export element? Because the CBAM makes a lot of sense for making sure there is a level playing field between domestic production and imports. But what about exports? So it might be a bit less for your industry, again, to be discussed in more detail, but for some, steel and others, it's an obvious case. So we need to make sure that we find a WTO compatible mechanism to ensure level playing field, also when it comes to carbon pricing and exports of some commodities that we produce in Europe, but for export markets. So I would say that the two key elements are free, make it work, downstream products extension, and the treatment of exports. If we manage to do these three elements right, then that's already a very good job in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. I've got a few more questions, but are there questions in the room? Has anyone got? Let's take a few.
It was good for you that there is no question.
Yeah, I was going to say.
We'd have more space.
Can we get a microphone just up here? Mr. Gentleman, the second row. Are there any other questions? Because we'll take a couple in one go, if so. I don't think so. Yeah, just introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's John Morrish. I'm CEO for Europe for Heidelberg Materials. I listened very carefully to what you were saying. It was positive, very positive. I'm also, by the way, following this guy into the president chair next year, so very engaged in these topics. my question was that where do lead markets fit into your views? We, just from the perspective of our company, we launch at the end of this year the first carbon capture plant up in Norway, and we're selling in the marketplace the first net zero carbon captured cement. And so we are learning very quickly at the sharp end what demand is like and what works and what doesn't work. And what I am constantly amazed by in a sector where up to 50% of the demand comes from government spending, indirectly and directly, is that most governments have zero requirement to buy low carbon or zero carbon cement and want to buy the cheapest and the lowest common denominator. And that seems to me a gaping hole that we should fill, and creating that demand would be the biggest accelerator that decarbonisation, industrial decarbonisation, could get.
Yeah. May I answer that one?
Yeah, go
So
ahead. I didn't
just
see any others.
thank you for your question. I mean, within the clean industrial deal, there will be the supply part. We discussed this already, and it has to be, otherwise we will fail, a demand size part, clearly. Whether it's about public procurement, whether it's about lead markets for cars, for steel, and so on. So there are various ways depending on the value chains, but of course, we have to have a demand-side approach and policies which are not consistent today. And the point is now to have to, I would say, to put that dimension into structural dialogues with the key value chains. Because, I mean, it's very easy for me to say, well, steel is in, I take an example outside of the scope of cement. Okay, steel is very much in favor of lead markets. But the car industry is saying, well, guys, we have already so much things to handle that do not bring that one additionally. If we are not able to put things together, what you said, I mean, public procurement is clearly a way to have offtakes and to have possibility for you to have more predictability on the demand. But then it might be, at least short term, a bit more costly. But de facto, it's part of de-risking. But the de-risking is not through a de-risking pot, it's through a public procurement. So, okay, let's say for you, after the dialogue, okay, let's take one possible conclusion. I'm not prejudging the conclusion, but one possible conclusion could be, if you need de-risking, it's not the de-risking through supply-side mechanism, but it's a de-risking through demand-side mechanism. So it means that for you, this is the way we could de-risk. So this amount of money does not pass through, I don't know, any EU competitiveness fund, but it passes through the green procurement policies. But let's have this dialogue, not only sector per sector, but value chain per value chain, because as you know, the sector, it's always the same kind of people having the same kind of problems. The value chain is a way to solve cross problems and bringing cross sector solutions. So that's key, that's key. And to be frank, we discussed this dialogue per value chain approach 5 years ago. 5 years ago. I specifically myself put an amendment to the climate law, you know, the law back to 2020, to have a sort of mandatory push from the Commission to dialogue with you and to make sure that we have a structural dialogue for all the key value chains. I wouldn't say that. I think there is room for improvement. Let's say positively. There is room for improvement, and I hope that the new commissioners and the new executive vice presidents will do it very short, very concrete, so that we can have this done.
Very good.
Okay, so for you, green public procurement or changing the rules of public procurement fits under your de-risking heading. Yeah.
It's for some yes, obviously for some sector it's a way to de-risk, because then you de-risk the demand side, and if you de-risk the demand side, then de facto it's way easier for you to invest.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, gentlemen.
Thank you. Cédric Demeus from Holcim. I have a very broad question on your perspective of Europe's competitiveness in the world, especially on industrial decarbonization. If I look at the speed at which it's happening in different parts of the world, basically you have the global south looking at the global north and how can we use mechanisms so that the global north will pay for the decarbonization in the global south. If you look at the US,
how's the election on the weekend?
the discussions at New York Climate Week is all about how do we use market mechanisms and chains of custody to deploy innovation and go at speed. And in Europe we are embedded in very complex regulation. And I would say the one thing that we're all looking for in the Clean Industrial Deal is give us flexibility. Give us the North Star, but give us flexibility to go left, right, or center, but really choose the option that makes most sense. What's your view on this? Thank you.
So that's what I said. I have the feeling, if my understanding of your question is the right one, that it's about adding up options for solutions, and then up to you to choose. And so being technological neutral in terms of technologies, but then up to you. Based on some key principles like de-risking and so on for demand and supply. That's, to my view, what we should do. If I step back and starting with your very first sentence on where we are relating, connecting Green Deal and competitiveness. So very wide picture analysis. I think, of course, we have the very important issue of energy price. But I would say that beyond this, or even maybe more important than that, and I think that Draghi didn't touch enough this issue, is that we are massively net importers of energy when the US are massively net exporters of energy. So then the price matters, but the structure matters even more. Because when you export, I mean, it's the share of GDP for the US that is coming from the net exporter position on the energy market is massive. And when you look at the same, of course, for the EU, the opposite, it's massive as well. And when you start discussing the difference between the GDPs of the US and the EU, just start by looking at what we pay, what they get, what they produce, what we buy. It's already massive, even before talking about the price. And then, of course, you have the price on top of this. So if we say that one of the revolutions in the US leading to this net positive situation is shale gas, and that we are not going to make shale gas in Europe. Why? For two reasons. First, the resources are more scarce, but more importantly, we are not an empty continent. I mean, look at where the fossils are in empty countries. Okay, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, Kazakhstan, Canada, US. Look at the US. The US shale gas, it's in the center. It's forbidden in the coast, forbidden. And the east and west coast in the US, it's more or less Europe. So that's why what we need to do is to go for electrification. Because the only way we can get our own energy revolution is to have electrification. Because we can produce electricity, we can't produce oil and gas, or very in a minor position. But on electricity, we have all the options open. And again, if we do not close the options, but we add them up, energy efficiencies, imports of hydrogen from Gulf countries and so on, plus nuclear, plus renewables in the baskets, and so on, and so on, and so on, then we have our revolution that would make sense in terms of competitiveness and sovereignty. That's why I'm deeply convinced that there is no opposition between Green Deal and competitiveness. It's the opposite. It's the opposite. So let's reaffirm this and let's depolarize the topic and the discussion instead of polarizing the two.
Okay, I'm going to take a final question. That's going to be the last one. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Canfin. Pañaras, I'm from Titan Cement, responsible for European business. We're actually also investing quite a bit in decarbonization, doing one of the biggest projects in Greece for carbon capture and being beneficiaries of the Innovation Fund. And I was very glad to hear the 3 points you mentioned, having a watertight market, keeping the competitiveness also for exports, having the funding is key, and the de-risking part. You mentioned actually part of my question in your last comment. A worry that has not been discussed extensively is the need for green, stable electricity at low cost. Just to give you an example, for our project, we're going to need in the same plant 3 or 4 times more the electricity. It will need to be green, and it will need to be stable throughout the day. this is not just production that you just mentioned, it's also transmission, it is storage, it is quite complicated. What are your thoughts on that?
So it's very good because I see all the priorities of what I think should be part of the clean industrial deal being aligned here. So we mentioned financing, demand side management, now we go for energy, and we have the level playing field and simplification. I mean, these are 5 keywords that should be put together for sure in the clean industrial deal. That's at least I see it. So again, the basis that we need more electrification. That's what you said. So more volume. We will never get more volume with only one technology. So we need to have a basket of technologies. So we need to start depolarizing this crazy debate about nuclear versus renewables. We need both. You do whatever you want, but we need both. Then, based on this, we need to make sure that we have also the capacity to have the grid. And on top of this, you add up the energy efficiency process. And at the end of that, you have a package. You have a package. And the thing that for me is the way forward is to have some sort of energy, zero carbon, low carbon, decarbonized, however you call it, and a zero energy union package, where you put power generation with all options in place, grid, energy efficiency, and a few other elements that at the end of the day will make a package. Why it is important to make a package? First, because from an economic and infrastructure perspective, you need all the value chain. So it's an integrated approach, it's consistent. Today it's completely siloed. You have a red and then hydrogen bank and then grid regulation and then energy union governance, completely split. Second, because from a political perspective, it's much easier to find a deal on a package. Because in the package, you have always something for you, even if you have to swallow something that you don't like. So if we split the problem in, 5 texts or 7 or 8 texts, then that will be, each text will be a battle between France and Germany on nuclear, France and Spain on grid, Greece and always. If we have a package approach exactly as what we did on the Fit for 55, then everybody is tight. Because then you get something, let's say I take the French case as an example, they can get something on nuclear, but in exchange they have to give something on grids. Okay, at the end of the day, everybody wins as Europeans. So that's why we need a package approach. And this package approach worked very well on the Fit for 55, but it's the only place in the Green Deal where we had this package approach. We failed on agriculture, also because we didn't have a package approach. So it's very important that this clean industrial deal makes the new package approach on 3, 4, 5 key priorities, including the ones you mentioned, and then politically speaking, it, to my view, will be easier to get it through than splitting it.
Okay, so this could be a fit for 90 package.
It's even that could be part of the discussion, the 90%, 2040, and so on. But it's also fit for success when it comes to jobs, to value creation, to competitiveness.
Yeah. Okay, just a final, I'll ask you to be brief, just I guess coming back to the European Parliament and where you sit, obviously we had elections, the makeup of the Parliament has changed. Just a quick, I guess, evaluation from you on how do you see that kind of impacting the way forward?
Well, for me, the keyword, responding very quickly, is depolarization. Yeah. If we keep on having, or if we have a polarized Green Deal agenda, we will fail. We will fail from a climate perspective, but we will fail also from an industrial perspective, because it will create uncertainty for everybody, and you will not be able to invest in anything. I mean, neither CCUS, because you have no guarantee on the carbon pricing, in fact, so nothing. So we freeze everything. And as we will not, so that could be an option to deregulate all that, fine, but then the counterparty to win is financing. But it happens that the very same people that would be willing to deregulate as well as against financing. So, and we will never win if we have no rules and no money. Okay, so we can be a bit more flexible on rules, happy to discuss, but we need to make sure that we have a consistent system. Okay, and just to conclude on something that is beyond the Green Deal agenda, it always strikes me that the US have 125% of public debt on GDP ratio. 125%. Eurozone 88. So I come from a country known for its public debt, 115, still less than the US, much more than the Eurozone. But I mean, at the Eurozone level, 88%, 40 points less than the US. Mm-hmm. And who cares about public debt when the US are doing IRA 1.2 trillion euros? Who cares? Nobody. Why? Because they have dollars. And you are forced to do transaction in the dollar or to buy treasury bonds from the US because it's all de facto a reserve currency or reserved financial asset. Why are we not able to put this debate at the European level? Say, okay, why we feel that we are so much constrained that we cannot invest in anything with 88% of public debt ratio when the US don't care at all with 125? Just raise the question, please. Make op-eds. Even you are not on my line on this, but at least we have a living debate on this because it will make a massive difference if we can solve this small 40% of ratio debt to GDP. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. We're going to come to the panel in a moment. We wanted to put up a question to all of you, which is the question we're going to ask our panel. So you can give them something to think about already. You need to go to Slido to see this question. So you can use the QR code up there, or go to slido.com, and you've got the hashtag, the code you need to enter. And the question is, what is the most critical challenge to fast-tracking decarbonization investments in energy-intensive sectors like cement? And it's a word cloud question, which means the idea is you type in a word. So we can see the results coming up there. And perhaps I'd invite our panelists to come up whilst we wait for the rest of the results to come in and take a seat up here, and then I'll introduce you in just a moment. So that's Chris Bolesta, Paula Ray Garcia, Manon Dufour, Rachel Moore, and Aris Tsikuras. Yeah, I think I'll sit on the end. You can sit where you like.
Hi, how are you?
So, still changing a little bit. It did say infrastructure in the middle. Now that's been replaced by clinker substitution. Still got infrastructure up there, demand, funding. And many words I recognize also from Pascal Canfin's answers just now around value chain, for example, financing, green public procurement. Okay, I'll give our panel a quick intro. So Chris Bolesta, sat next to me, Secretary of State at the Polish Ministry of Climate and Environment since earlier this year. You may recognize him from Brussels. He was previously heading up the CCUS team at DG Energy at the European Commission, and therefore I imagine very much involved in industrial carbon management strategy as well prior to coming out. He's originally an economist, has worked on CCUS previously in Brussels as well, back about, I guess...
Ages ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. Left for a couple of years to advise the Polish energy and climate minister and basically worked for a think tank and then came back to Brussels. So good to see you here again. Paula Ray Garcia, stepping in kindly for Mechthild Wursdorfer, who had to take a flight and therefore, yeah, it was impossible for her to join us. But we're very happy to have Paula, Deputy Head of Unit for Renewables and Energy System Integration Policy at DG Ener. She's been with the Commission for many years, many of those in DG Ener, but also worked on health and consumers, and prior to that on environmental issues. Prior to that, I had a little bit of time of UNEP and is originally a biologist, I read, just like myself. So nice to meet you. Then we have Manon Dufour, stepping in for Johanna Leyen, who's unfortunately sick today, and that's why she can't be with us. However, a very able replacement in Manon, who heads up the E3G office here in Brussels as its executive director. So she's a real expert on European climate policy, has been doing a lot of work on the Green Deal and energy, competition, industrial policy around that. She previously worked at Bloomberg New Energy Finance in London and New York, and is originally an engineer. So, long time ago. So, nice to meet you. Rachel Moore joins us as the managing director of CarbStrat, which is a niche consultancy that she founded back in, last year, 2023, recently, which aims to accelerate the deployment of CCUS technologies, not just here in Europe, but around the world. She's a real CCUS expert, previously advised the World Bank on this issue. She's also the author of the IEA CCUS Handbook, and has been involved on the ground, notably helping an African country, for example, develop a CCUS work program. And she has a PhD in CO2 storage and base salt, so very consistent trajectory. And finally, Aris Tsikaras, Director for Decarbonisation Strategy at the Titan Cement Group, which means he's responsible for Titan's large decarbonisation projects, which could be CCS, but also, for example, waste management. He was previously a partner at McKinsey, worked for the company various locations around the world, and there too specialized in energy and energy-intensive companies, and has a background in engineering, economics, and management. So, great to see you all. We still have the results of the biggest challenge question up there. And I would basically like to kick off by putting the same question to each of you. We can start with you, Chris. What do you see? And yeah, I'm going to say right up front, try and keep your answers relatively short, because I recognize we have quite a few of you, a lot to get through, and we'll try and take some questions from the floor too. What do you see as the most critical challenge to fast-track investments in industries like cement?
I think my answer is not on the screen. I would say return on investment, because you have to be sure you get a return on investment if you want to fast-track your investment. For me, that would be number one, and I would actually include three elements. One would be, what's the alternative? What can I do with my capital? Do I have an option to move from Europe if we are staying in our field? If there's better, greener pastures somewhere else, then I could go. Second element of this decision making would be, is the technology to go to net zero available on the market, and is the regulatory framework ready to actually go ahead with that investment? And third and final, is the product I'm going to put on the market competitive, and is there an incentive on the market to push the product? For example, green public procurement. So I think there's 1 and 3 elements.
Okay, so it's technology available, regulation, and then
Yeah,
finally the demand
yeah.
side. And
But all
return
comes
on
down to the
investment
return on
would be
investment.
your keyword.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Paula?
Yes, no, thank you very much, and good morning also to everybody from my side. So I think also what was clear from the initial part of today's discussion is that really now what we see is that industrial policy will have very much energy policy at the center. So for me, really one quite critical challenge is how to bring together the legal framework that we have already in place, and that it was also underlined in the introduction as really the stepping stone where we are starting from, with the investments that are needed. So we really have now in place ambitious targets for renewables with permitting as well that needs to be put in place, and that comes in, although I imagine that it was also with a broader frame. We also have the revised energy efficiency directive that's also quite important for industrial processes. We have the revised electricity market design, where you have demand flexibility, you have storage. You also have quite interesting tools for certainty on, for instance, electricity prices, like long-term contracts, power purchase agreements, so that already also connects the legal side with the investment side. We also have the Net Zero Industry Act opening quite some ground. We also have what is happening on the infrastructure side, being for grids, for hydrogen, for CCS. Also, in this regard, we will also need to look into what else is needed on the regulatory side, including as a follow-up to the carbon industrial management strategy. But then the big question is really how to trigger, how to facilitate those concrete investments for transforming industrial processes, also for energy efficiency, for renewables, for self-consumption in industry, and then again for clean energy infrastructure. So really this connection between the two is for me the biggest challenge.
Okay, thank you. And as you started off by saying, yes, energy is going to be at the heart of industrial policy going forward. Thank you. Manon?
I know we have to give brief answers, but if I can take a second to flag like how natural the first question it seems, and how this was absolutely not the case 5 years ago. We were talking about really kind of hard to abate sectors, and like with a mix of like what we've heard, like CBAM, ETS, kind of phasing out of free allowances, and kind of roadmaps like the one of CEMBUREAU. I think we've moved on, so now it's about building the momentum and kind of taking the opportunity rather than kind of starting. So just wanted to flag this because I think it's quite meaningful. I'm also saying this because it's hard to disagree with what Christophe said. I think in that light of having to now build momentum and build on the opportunity, this is about building the business case for decarbonisation investment. And it is on like similar level on the fact that we do need kind of regulation, like kind of standards, product requirement to drive this, and we need like the clean markets and public procurement. We do need this in a meaningful way, in the sense that we've had tons of experience from like voluntary pledges that are kind of useful in building that momentum, but are not sufficient in themselves. I think actually from talking to people, we also find that some are even struggling to have the data to understand if like what they're purchasing is kind of actually correct. So it does need to be a bit more kind of centralized, and it's hard to argue for more regulation, but I think that's one of the areas where like Europe leads usually, and you can set international rules and apply that kind of Brussels effect, which sometimes is considered as a myth, but I think is quite meaningful in driving demand in kind of new sectors. And similarly on public procurement, there's some very nice examples, like for like local like infrastructure project, major ones, but it does have to be a lot more mainstream to build scale and to build this like throughout.
So how does it, what word does that boil down to for you? Would you
Product
say?
requirements and public procurement. Or lead markets is
lead markets. Okay. Yeah. Rachel?
Well, for me, it's the ability to take FID. It sounds simple, you can't invest if you can't take FID, but I speak to a lot of companies, some of my clients are sitting between a completed feed and the ability to make that investment. And they're sitting there for a couple of reasons. One, they're in permitting purgatory because they don't need to permit just a CO2 capture unit. They also need to permit new electricity lines, potentially oxygen, potentially a whole bunch of other things. On top of that, there is this lack of business models. There is this lack of a lead market mechanism, which we are developing. It's critical for your industry, but it's critical for many others. And the other thing, which is why pretty much almost every CO2 management project in Europe is sitting in purgatory right now, is the counterparty and cross-chain risk. We cannot take an FID on a capture unit if you don't know where your store is or who your transporter is. But equally, they cannot take FID without you. So we have this chicken and egg, which means that everyone's just sitting around waiting to take their final investment decisions. And that is why I would say just the ability to take FID.
Yeah. Very clear. Aris.
So I think that it boils down to having a de-risked, bankable business case. I was in the Commission's Industrial Carbon Management Conference last week. There was a lot of people there. There were people from industry, from the oil and gas sector. The European Commission was obviously there. Consultants. I didn't see many banks, and to me that was telling in terms of how these projects are proceeding right now. So, and the question then is, what do you need to get a bankable business case? In my view, we need a lot of the things that we've already discussed. So, obviously you need the permitting. A lot of the projects are stuck with, very long lead times on permitting, uncertainty of permitting, legal challenges on permitting by, local communities and so on. So that's critical. We talked about the watertight CBAM. That's absolutely critical, because otherwise you will just be making a huge investment, which you don't know if you're going to get the payback for. You need financing. You need the lead markets. You need electricity. You need all these things to make sure that you build a watertight business case. And then let's not forget that this is not just about our perimeter. So you need the whole value chain to happen at the same time. So you need de-risking of the value chain in a way that everyone can take FID at the same time. It's a very challenging exercise. There's very few industries that can do this. So I think this is the challenge that we're facing.
Okay. And if you had to pick a word, I would get maybe banks, what you started with. It comes down to them.
I would say you need a de-risked, bankable business case.
De-risking, yeah.
That's 4 words. But.
Okay, and if we turn then to the clean industrial deal, because again, many familiar words here from so Pascal gave us his view on what he thinks should be in there. Same question to you. So you've laid out the challenges. Okay, what needs to be in the green industrial deal to ultimately get these investments made? No particular order. So. Rachel, why don't you kick off?
Okay, I can start. Well, first of all, I think we need to have a serious discussion in Europe about what is security moving forwards. I was at the IEA when Russia invaded Ukraine, and suddenly energy security was at the top of the list. Moving forwards in a decarbonized world, is security critical minerals only, or is it the cement you need to build it all? Is it the steel you need to build it all? What happens if we lose those industries here in Europe? Does that make us less secure? It certainly makes us less competitive. And additionally, I go to lots of conferences, I get asked to speak a fair amount, and I hear a lot that everyone says your industry has 2 choices. They either can decarbonize or they can pay EU allowances. That's not the case. There are 2 choices, in my opinion. It's decarbonize or leave. No one is able to pay the allowances moving forwards at an EU ETS price of €60 a ton, let alone if we hit 100 or 150. And that means if you want to keep your industry here, if you consider your industry critical to your international competitiveness and to your security as a continent, you need to work with your industry to make a package that allows them to stay and supports all of the things they bring to you, both in the jobs, but the products and the technologies, the innovation, etc.
Okay, so security, we should think about security in terms of things like steel and cement, as well as not only make it a purely critical minerals discussion. And your second point, the real choice is decarbonize or leave. That's in reality what we're facing. Who else?
I can go. Well, actually, I don't know how to give you the soundbite for this, because I think there's I think the question is also like there's a clean industrial deal that has to be actually kind of plugging a lot of the gaps, that has to focus, I think, on industrial decarbonization and driving this properly, and I'll come back to that. But it also needs to probably like build on like the Draghi report, quite simply, on having like access to abundant like renewables, affordable renewables as kind of the core of industrial policy. So there's a strong like energy union angle, as Pascal Canfin was saying. There's needs to much stronger European governance, because this is not like a fragmentation in the internal market. Our approaches to this is not going to solve it. So there needs to be a strong facet of it. Learning from the Green Deal, we can't forget about the social dimension when we start off. So of course there'll be offers for workers, but what is a deal for society at large as well? There'll be like discussions on like who pays, how to distribute this. And finally, I think the international dimension will be crucial as well in getting this right. Even if we are at a time where maybe more interventions and like more industrial policy is what we need in Europe, it does need to be very aware of the fact that we are in a kind of we have like very global supply chains, and we do need to build our resilience, but also we need to drive what to participate in like the global decarbonization efforts. So I think there are. I don't want to make this sound into like a Green Deal package of like 30 regulations, but I think the scope could be quite interesting, and I'm interested in what the Commission is thinking of in terms of the scope. Now, if I can point on like the specific, I think Industrial Decarbonization Act, which I'm not quite sure what the timing or anything is, but this one is probably a lot more targeted on what we were just discussing in the first, instance with the first question, where there again, I think there's a strong focus on like electrification of industrial processes. It might not be extremely relevant for cement, but like a recent analysis we published looks at, I think 90% of energy demand from industry can be electrified. So that's very significant, and it has benefits in terms of cost for the industries, but also for like the SMEs and for flexibility. So it's really one of these win-win-win kind of situation we keep hearing about. We talked about lead markets already. It's a big part of it. I think then in the context of cement, we need to drive demand, but like as far as I understand, like there's regulation that actually actively prevents innovative solutions to be deployed, because it's like more product-based rather than performance-based. So there's clearly a lot of work on that. We can't forget the kind of circularity element, which has been a priority for the Commission for quite a while, but hasn't completely made it through industrial policy yet, or industrial kind of heavy industry like aspects. So like we do need to be conscious of like how much demand we create, and we have to kind of recycle more and minimize this. And then financing, we talked about, and we can talk at length, I guess. And the whole aspect on governance, again, better planning, especially when it comes to access to infrastructure, to like CO2 storage. I think that has to be just brought to the fore a lot more.
Yeah, just one I suppose clarification. When you mentioned the Industrial Decarbonisation Act, so that's also being called the Decarbonisation Accelerator Act. What's the difference between that and the Clean Industrial Deal?
Maybe we'll hear from Paula. I don't know. I kind of expect, but I couldn't be completely wrong. This is me like reading the tea leaves, that the Clean Industrial Deal would be kind of a roadmap that touches on industry, but also maybe clean tech a bit more, and what is kind of the societal deal element, where this act will be like the legal instrument that kind of bridges it forward. But I don't expect like trade policy to be a big element of the act, where it probably should be part of the Clean Industrial Deal. But this is me.
Paula, that's probably time for you to.
Yes or no? I think what we know, which is basically from the elements in the political guidelines and also in the mission letters, goes along this understanding at this point. Of course, the next step is to go through the hearings of the European Parliament, and there could be then also some elements coming up there, so that then when the new Commission is really in place, really fleshes out the details, but in terms of overall understanding, I think is as presented. Also from my side, maybe to mention a couple of other elements coming, of course, from the energy part of it, but still of what is there in the political guidelines that is relevant for the Clean Industrial Deal. So there is, of course, the focus on enforcement and on implementation. That's really very important, but really going into how to deliver on the ground. So thinking about, of course, we have this 2030 framework, but then how to move it from law, from paper, into really what changes, what needs to happen then for this to work. In terms of long-term certainty that was mentioned, we also have, of course, the let's say, already proposed 90% greenhouse gas target. That's also an important element for 2040. We have the element also of investments into clean energy infrastructure. That's also quite important. That's also quite relevant for industry, and even more for energy-intensive industry. And then there is the whole angle that was also mentioned of, let's say, affordable energy in the broad sense, the link to electrification. And here there are quite some elements that could be relevant in this regard. So everything that we have already in terms of tools that have been agreed upon, being, as I was mentioning, on demand side flexibility, that's quite important. The storage demand response, how to tap on that also for industry. Also the element of long-term contracts that somehow secure access to lower electricity, lower price for electricity for industry, and also renewable electricity in this case. And then all the elements that we have in addition, being on energy efficiency, how to further tap on that, how to bring also ESCO-SINs, how to bring new models. So all that I think should be part of the reflection together also with, of course, the investment side. So how to also connect to the risking elements that were mentioned. I think that will also feature into this reflection.
Okay. Yeah, we can maybe get into the details of infrastructure a little bit more in a moment, but first I want to give Chris and Aris a chance to respond on what for you is at the crux of a clean industrial deal and potentially something like a decarbonisation accelerator act.
Yeah, I quickly noted 5 points. One is clearly on the fairy tale end, because, you know, we will see the communication, I think a communication within the first 100 days. I don't think it's you know, credible to expect anything touching on budget. But I would like to see something to that end in the clean industrial deal, because I think we need to build on a beautiful tool that we have, the innovation fund. I think that we need to make it more robust, to give it more budget, and to, you know, extend it to more technologies. I think this is the kernel or the seed of true European industrial policy, and I think we need to enforce it. But that's, as I said, this is on the fairy tale end, and we can add bells and whistles to it, because I would imagine that we can use the aggregate EU to actually have a common purchasing of say, you know, capacity, the decarbonized capacity, either to get you know, more uniform price, energy price across Europe, or, you know, to have CCS plants in various parts of Europe. So this is the kind of more innovative ideas. But I think we will probably see that there'll be a deregulation, because, you know, it's always easy to put like, oh, there'll be you know, less red tape, and I think this is precisely, we need to help these companies who are in you know, purgatory, waiting for some complicated procedures to end. And I think one single EU window for complicated cross-border projects especially would be something that the project could appreciate. I think the strategy needs to involve also action plan how to make the defense mechanism more robust, you know, the protection at the external border of the EU, and of course green procurement. This is a no-brainer. So EU-wide green procurement. And of course, this is what Draghi mentions. We need to have at least an action plan how to get to more affordable energy price for industry, at least for industry.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't want to repeat what was said, because I think all of the above would probably be my opening statement here. I'd like to stand a bit more on the part of infrastructure, and, you know, how do you build the infrastructure around the projects to make it happen. And I'm going to focus quite a bit on CCS, because I think that's one of the biggest levers that we're dealing with right now. And I think CCS, the way it's been developed so far, you need at least 3 big industries aligning with you. So you need the electricity industry to provide the energy, you need the transport industry to get your gas where it's going to be stored, and you need the oil and gas industry to help you store it. If you actually take a map of Europe and you draw a horizontal line across Brussels, where we are today, from west to east, you will basically see that 90% of the storage capacity sits above that line. So the rest of Europe right now does not have ready access to this storage. So, making sure that all the storage capacity is developed before anything else, I think is going to be one of the most important aspects of it. Then you get to transport capacity, and this is something totally new. Europe doesn't have significant CO2 transport capacity. The US has, at least 8,000 kilometers of that, and we have none, almost. So I think the need to develop, regulate, and build this transport capacity will be critical for these projects to happen. And the third one is obviously electricity that we talked quite a lot about. I think my colleague mentioned before about the electricity needs for these projects being massive versus our own electricity consumption is crucial. I think the CEMBUREAU has estimated that you need to increase your consumption of electricity from about 20 terawatt hours today to at least 50 or maybe 100 or more than 100 going forward. This is a huge increase versus what we are expecting, what we are using today, and will require a huge increase in that infrastructure as well.
So is that specifically for CCS?
That will depend a lot
on
the technologies of CCS used and so on, their range. But I think the important part is not just to develop this infrastructure, but also to regulate it in a way, right? So, for example, a lot of the storage sites are natural monopolies. The grids are by definition natural monopolies. So, particularly in cases where you don't have too many options, it is crucial that these assets have a cost-plus approach, transparent costing, and they have deadlines to be developed and to develop to the full extent. The Net Zero Industry Act puts a target of 50 million tons a year of injection by the end of 2030, and I think this is a fantastic push. How that target actually translates into consequences if it is not met, I think is one of the biggest questions that we will need to answer going forward.
Yeah, okay. On infrastructures, but one question that's come in via Slido. How can we get out of the chicken and egg problem on CCUS that Rachel mentioned? I guess this is getting the counterparties to align and to making sure that there is a business case for everyone. It kind of follows on from what both of you have said. Who wants to have a go at answering that?
I could start a bit, because we're facing it on a day-to-day, and what you're seeing is that I think, first of all, there's a cultural barrier to be overcome, right? So you have cement companies talking to electricity companies, talking to pipeline companies, and talking to oil and gas exploration and production companies. These are very different animals that need to sit down and align to make this value chain happen. So, one thing that has worked pretty well in a couple of the successful projects that have happened so far is to put these people together in a structured manner and make sure that you have these cross-functional groups that work together systematically to get to FID. If everyone tries to do these projects on themselves, it's just not going to happen because the projects are too complex. So the first thing that needs to happen is for this cross-functionality to be enabled. The state has proven to be quite a good enabler in these kind of cross-functional meetings, and I think that should be the starting point of how these things would work.
Okay. Rachel, do you want to?
Yeah, so to follow on, I think the state has been the proven enabler. And this is where, in my opinion, the European Commission needs to step up and show leadership in the space. We are talking about cross-border projects. Norway, Longship got off the ground because Gassnova and SOE walked all of them through. And that meant that things were proceeding together. The Innovation Fund is a bucket. The Net Zero Industry Act storage obligation is a bucket. We will hopefully get regulation on transport soon. but we haven't connected the two yet. In my opinion, leadership could be developing a European-backed insurance mechanism, which is basically saying, okay, right now the Innovation Fund is 40 billion. Slip off 2 or 3 or 4 of that to provide insurance against solely the counterparty risk. If you're a cement company with 1 million tons of CO2 you capturing, and you are commissioned a year before your store, today that's 65 million euros of allowances you have to pay, even though you did everything in your best efforts to be there. And conversely, if you're a transport or storage operator and you have developed everything and one of your anchor projects is a year delayed, you're missing their revenue. On the transport and storage side, we see some de-risking already in the UK by making it a regulated asset-based model. If the project doesn't come through that needs to deliver the CO2, they're still guaranteed at least some of that. But we can advance the value chain together if you de-risk the value chain. And in my opinion, the best way to do that would be to put a mechanism that would allow for insurance on counterparty risk. And that can't be on a member state by member state approach, because these are cross-border projects. And it can't necessarily be go to the private market, because what insurance company is going to issue an insurance product for counterparty risk when almost every construction project overruns by multiple months? So this is where, if the state and the Commission and Europe wants this to happen, put potentially money behind it, and in an ideal world, the money won't actually need to be spent.
This presumably could fall under Pascal Canfin's de-risking category, so something, I don't know, Paula, whether you can comment at all, whether this is something specifically indeed for, and also in the context of CCUS, might just being thought about?
Yeah, no, I think really this will be part of some of the initiatives that we will see in the new mandate, also as a follow-up of the carbon management strategy. And there really, we are really looking into these different elements for CO2 transport, for planning. And then I think what is also important is this element that was coming up of how to bring, let's say, the different actors together as well, how to coordinate from the different angles of the value chain. And for that, I think also, and it was mentioned before, the CCUS forum that we have established, I think, is quite a good step in that direction. And it also allows, preparation of the new initiatives that will come, but also knowledge sharing and identifying what could work well. And one of the elements is, of course, this aspect of cross-border infrastructure. And there is also this step of let's say, identifying Europe coordinators to move this forward, and to also have, let's say, early development of these projects so that they can also take up a speed and look into these different elements of the risking as well.
Okay. And do we have any sense yet of whether, as to whether CO2 transport, potentially storage infrastructure, is likely to be regulated infrastructure or market?
That's one of the aspects that was already in the strategy anticipated as something to be examined. So really, regulatory aspects are part of what is being planned. Yeah.
Okay. Chris, what needs to happen to get CCUS off the ground? Briefly.
Briefly. Thanks. No, I think I would like to follow up on the idea of the insurance-backed mechanism, because I think it's a very good one, and I think it could potentially push us forward with projects. I think ideally parties of this mechanism would be the European Commission, storage companies, and member states, because this requires a larger infrastructure in terms of backing up certain investments. But I think we also need to look at where we are with regulatory framework. Initially, it was the capture companies who were kind of pushed by ETS to invest in technology like CCS. But the potential storage operators, let's call them oil and gas companies, they were not incentivized at all. So they were playing hard to get, like, oh, well, maybe I will invest if you pay me $1 million for 1 ton. So I think that with Net Zero Industry Act and the storage obligation, we actually brought the two parties to the table. It's like they now speak on equal terms. One party has obligation from EU ETS and one from Net Zero Industry Act. I think it's still early days because we don't have implementing acts to NZIA, but I think this will be the framework that will enable us to break the catch-22 in moving forward.
Okay. And do we need a revision to the CCS directive or any other, I guess, legislative change, or it's now a question of, as you say, the incentives are there and it's more bringing parties together, coming up with an
It's
insurance
really
mechanism?
difficult to say because we've adopted CCS directive, was it 2007-ish? And it was never properly used because there were no projects. But time moved on, and I think maybe certain simplifications are needed. But
Okay. Yeah.
Can I mean, first, like, I agree. I think the NZIA, like, was a good way to kind of maybe stop that chicken and egg problem and get started. I think maybe just to build on what we were hearing from a more meta level, I think one of the challenges we're going to have, like, a pretty big political challenge, is that we're going to have to start prioritizing a lot more. I think we heard Pascal Canfin on the need to, like, look at different solutions and be flexible. I kind of agree conceptually, but the way I understand the CCS and kind of storage problem is that we have very finite storage possibilities, and the more we need, like, the more expensive it will be because you have to go inland, which is very difficult. There's all the kind of infrastructure to build. So in a sense, like, it's a finite resource. On the other hand, there's potentially a lot of demand, not all of it with kind of the same, like, kind of climate value or kind of, like, I don't know, like a business case or value case for it. Like, similarly to the hydrogen ladder that I think a lot of people know there, like, that looks at maybe looking at prioritizing the use for hydrogen as in domestic heating or road transport doesn't make any sense, but still decarbonization, yes, you can use it. It's very similar for CCS. We have to, I think, become a lot clearer about where is CCS really needed and where it's not. So I think it's clear now, coal power, not worthwhile. Clinker, like a kind of lime and production, like, yes. But within this, it does require, like, a strong intervention, I think, or like strong, it's not even coordination, it's kind of decision and prioritization across investment. And when you look at the location of it all, it's also more complex because if a lot of the storage is, like, near the coastline, I think a lot of the most valuable uses on kind of clinker or lime production are really spread out and sometimes, like, near urban centers. So you are more than, like, a state intervening and kind of coordinating with the value chain. You're probably going to need, like, the Commission or a similar kind of meta body that is informed and then can drive a bit that decision. This is a very hard conversation to have. This is not, I don't think it's been started really in the policy realm, but I think if we want to build out and roll out this infrastructure and the transport requirements, we probably do need to go into that direction. And I think the political context being what it is, I don't know how we manage to have that conversation, but I think it's one that needs to be integrated in the next 5 years.
Okay. I'd like to ask if you want to come back, and then we'll see if there are any questions in the room after that. Yeah.
Can I just build on this a little bit, because I've done this for storage for quite a lot of things, and for the IEA specifically. Network planning is excellent. We need ultimately to have a cross-border network to move things, but it should not come at the expense of being able to develop the resource beneath your feet. It may not be an ideal storage resource, but it may be one that you are sitting on, and that could mean that you can move faster. So a lot of cement companies are sitting on carbonate platforms. They may end up having not brilliant storage resources beneath their feet, but still accessible storage resources beneath their feet. And it's a quarry, so it's already degraded land that isn't going to require a pipeline through a city. We should make sure that as we focus on network planning, as we focus on building out for large storage in the North Sea or in and around parts of Italy or Spain, we also allow for companies to develop what is nearby, onshore, and beneath their feet. And that is something that has been missing from this discussion, in my opinion. As we move forward, it's really how do we get to the North Sea, not, oh, actually, what about just going down?
Points.
Let me add
Yes.
a couple of points. I think the incentive for the oil and gas companies to develop their storage field does not only come from the NZIA. I'd like to just add to that point that the oil and gas companies are basically postponing a lot of decommissioning expenses as well. So there is a financial incentive for the oil and gas companies to store. It's not just so that they have a reason to do it. Given the scarcity of the storage that we do face in a lot of places in Europe, be those in the south or be those in Central and Eastern Europe, one thought to start considering is, do we want to start looking outside the EU, and what implications would that have? That is complex. It's, you need the agreement from the governments. You need a rethinking of a lot of the EU Commission's thinking on storage so far. But if we want to make this happen and if we want to meet this kind of targets, I think it's a conversation that needs to start. And the last point, when we talked about the alignment of the value chain, there is one technical point which is extremely important, which is the CO2 specs. If we really want to build a unified market on CO2 transport and storage, and the CO2 specs are just defined by the storage operator, the incentive of every storage operator is to define their own CO2 specs so that there is no uniform market. So I think a push by the Commission to define at least a minimum CO2 specs would be super welcome, in the sense that it really makes the creation of a market much more possible.
Yeah, and presumably will ultimately lead to a more efficient build-out of infrastructure that
Exactly.
you manage
Exactly.
temperature and pressure in a way.
And if you think about it, there's a lot of experience to be leveraged from outside Europe. The US has a very big CO2 network. They've been injecting CO2 for decades. Norway as well. So it's not as if we need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to talk to people outside the EU as well.
Okay. Can I see any hands for any questions? Yeah, I see these two. So we'll take those two and then come back to the panel.
Hello, it's Juan Fernando Lopez from the ERCFT, think tank based in Brussels. So my question, when I started working on the ETS in 2018, I was looking only at the EU ETS. Now there is an increasing role with the Renewable Energy Directive, Energy Efficiency Directive. Christophe mentioned also the CCS Directive that in the beginning was not so relevant as is now, also with the EU ETS. How do you see the role of the EU ETS in the future of the ETS climate policy? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, let's take the other question right away.
Okay, fine.
As well.
It was a sort of comment to try and bring your, Aris in particular, and Rachel's comments there. You talked about storage and transport and learning from other people. We as a company have got, I think, 6 business cases in the EU at either mid-feed or FID purgatory, and then 1 business case in the UK that is in good shape. And that is because, to your point, it's a regulated transport and storage situation. It's a good mix of grant funding, company investment, and contract for difference, and it's moving ahead quickly. And so the comments that you've just made about learning from the US and Norway, that's valid, but why don't we copy-paste what the UK is doing? And we do regularly talk about reinventing the wheel. And we're right in there in the middle of these business decisions right now, and it seems they seem to be doing the right thing.
Okay, thank you. So the role of the EU ETS and why not simply do what the UK is doing? A third question? Okay, and then we'll come back to the panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pierre Bultes, CRH. Just an observation and a question. Okay, Sonia, when you open this table ronde, you actually shared the question around what's absolutely critical to achieve decarbonization, etc., in our sector. And the first answer was actually a clinker substitution. And we spent 30 minutes, 35 minutes discussing CCS. So I think it's in itself quite interesting to see that the first answer was clinker substitution. So I have a question for Aris. Aris, what do you think are the main challenges to achieve CEMBUREAU industry roadmap on this specific topic of clinker substitution, and what should happen in this field of clinker substitution? Thank you.
Thank you. Can we come to that one last? I was actually going to ask him that, and broader infrastructure, like notably also grids, so you can prepare that, Aris, already. Should we start with well, why not copy the UK? Maybe that's the simplest one to start with, and then EU ETS.
Because they left and we don't like them.
You can't be that honest.
I can take
Rachel?
some of that. So I think I'm going to challenge Eris. I don't think we need a true CO2 specification beyond a technical floor for health and safety. And I'm going to use the UK as an example. There is not a regulated CO2 spec. That was decided of, okay, main focus is pipelines now. In the United States, we're basically using 95% CO2. It's not particularly clean because most of it's coming up from the ground. You can run a pipeline at 95%. Depending on what you have in it. And this is where using hubs and networks makes it more complicated. When you start introducing multiple streams of CO2 with multiple different impurities, those impurities start reacting with one another. I'm a geochemist, I'm not a material scientist, but that's not going to be good for your steel. And that's where we need to have some amount of technical understanding on this. But I agree, I think we should more or less take some of what we can from the United States, some of what we can from the UK, some of what we can from here, and move this forwards. The CCFDs are great. We heard last week that Europe won't do a CCFD at the European level. Maybe that's something we should lobby for in the new Clean Industrial Deal. We need, the grant funding is great. The UK is much more focused on just get a project done. It's much less focused on the innovation aspect. So there are lots of things we can take from our neighbours, even if they did leave. But we can also, as Ara said, look to the United States, look elsewhere as well.
If I may add on that, I think on the part of learning from, on the part of specs to start with, I think we're talking more or less the same thing because I was talking about a minimum spec. But on the UK, I think the UK has indeed a great model. They've spent 20 years thinking about it. I think if you look at the department within the Department of Energy that's looking into this, it's got like 200 people. So there's definitely a lot of learning to be had. They have a very good design for their CFDs in that they've taken out the transport and storage, which gives an incentive for the transport and storage operators to reduce their cost as much as possible. So there's definitely a lot of learnings to be had there as well. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. The EU ETS question.
I think I can take it, although I think this is a debate for at least one day in a similar conference. I think we need to start from the fact that it's a cap and trade system and it has a clear expiry date. So the question is what to do after the expiry date. Do we change the expiry date? Do we add more kind of CO2 to it, carbon removals, for example, or do we, factor in some emissions from outside of the EU using Article 6 of the international regime? So there's plenty of ideas. Myself, I think that we should really think about giving it a second life, remaining relevant, using opportunities to work with external parties. But at the end of the day, or at least today, it has a clear expiry date.
Yes, Manon.
The very non-technical answer to that, I think, is just, I think when the ETS was first implemented, I mean, this was about launching on the road to decarbonization, and we didn't know it yet, like climate neutrality. So this was putting a price, and then you did like a little renewables, etc. It's now we've reached to the phase where, and it's not a great word, like it's like climate is very much mainstreamed, and we're not like everything we're talking about now is not a battle about putting a price on carbon. It's about getting the puzzle right with a bit of like industrial policy and a bit of financing and a bit of like coordination. It's quite complex. I think, I don't know, to your question, like ETS is going to be one interesting and important element, but out of many, I think compared to like 10 or 20 years ago, it's very different. I think one dimension is still going to be extremely relevant is that kind of international level playing field that I think Pascal Canfin started on, or maybe you did, on the fact that if we want to keep trade open, and I think we need to, it does need to be on a level playing field, and ETS in a combination with CBAM I think is quite important to do that, and like linking to other jurisdictions is quite important. So I think in that angle it remains very crucial.
Okay, thank you. Then Aris, come back to you, and this is probably a final sort of proper infrastructure question, but indeed we've talked about CCS, CCUS, and I'm conscious, indeed, that clinker substitution came out as the big one. Some of you, I think, we've also mentioned the need for more electricity. So if you want to just come back on, indeed, what's the challenge around clinker substitution, and any other comment on, I guess, other infrastructure needs that are not CCS related.
Yeah, I think the first of all, it's not an either or. I think we need to look at both. The CCS is a bit, for the process emissions and looking at clinker content reduction, but I think. For the SCMs, the fact that we've had the two most popular SCMs of the past, which were the slag and fly ash, in sort of limited or declining supply, is a challenge. So I think the two challenges I would come up with, one would be sourcing, so to make sure that there are we can find the locations and we can source this material. I know a lot of companies are moving in that direction, either organically or inorganically, to get access to this material. And the other would be how to translate this into product standards and to make sure that this is incorporated into what we actually end up selling to the customer. So I think getting these two out of the way would probably be quite a long way to make it happen.
Okay, thank you. So we've talked quite a lot already about the need for everything to align along the value chain, but I'd follow up maybe with a question on how to. I mean, we've talked about the insurance dimension of that, and I guess the question here is, what else can be done from within the industry or outside it? I'm thinking here policy-wise, for example, changes to competition policy that would further build coordination within the value chain. Or have we covered that off? I think of competition because we haven't specifically mentioned that, but there may be other things. Is there anything else that could further develop this coordination? Yeah, you can. Iris is the obvious one to answer because he's in the value chain, but I'm happy for others to kick off and just to give him a moment to breathe.
I actually have a question to the room, and that is, what does open access mean? We talk about open access, transport and storage. These are 15, 20-year contracts, and you have a finite amount of CO2 you can put in a pipe and a finite amount of CO2 you can put in a store. So what is open access, and how is this being defined in the value chain? And that's my comment.
Okay. Paula, is there anything, thinking... when we talk about the Green Deal, we've got Teresa Ribeiro, who's also in charge of competition now, so maybe on that dimension, is there anything you can say at this point? How does that factor into, ultimately bringing all these different players together?
I mean, not much more in this regard than what you can find in the political guidelines and in the mission letters. I think what is important is to keep in mind that really a key aim will be to connect decarbonization of industry with competitiveness, and then of course look at all the tools that are available, and this could include definitely what we have in terms of competition policy, but beyond that, for the details, I think it's too early to say.
If I am to add something, I think one thing that if we believe that the state is a good facilitator for these cross-functional discussions, I think it's important for the state to be adequately incentivized to support these projects. And we know that each member state have their own national energy and climate plan, and they make some commitments to it. I think giving some teeth to these climate plans and making sure that they are of a more binding nature to the states would basically effectively facilitate would make them more aligned with the industry and with what the industry wants to achieve. I think right now what we're seeing is that people are committed to national energy climate plans, but that commitment is not uniform across Europe. So the more we can make this as institutional as possible, the better, and that would lead to the state wanting to have an active role in these discussions.
Mm-hmm. So having national energy climate plans that states are bound to, and therefore they're incentivized. And it comes back maybe to what Ken said at the beginning about this need for coordination, horizontally, but also vertically.
I see this discussion in Council not going well. But, I think for competition policy, it would probably be good to harmonize better the state aid rules, because I think we had few huge events, financial crisis, we had COVID, and we had different things shaping state aid guidelines and competition rules within the EU that are now allowing countries, member states with more fiscal space to actually help their industries better. And I think that's not good for the overall European competition. I think we should stop fighting between member states because we have bigger fish to fry. In order to keep European industry competitive vis-à-vis China's and the US, we need to cooperate better within the EU.
And if I may maybe react on also one aspect of the national energy and climate plans, we also need to keep in mind that we have just received a small number by now. I think we are around 11 final NECPs in alignment with the revised targets, whilst the deadline was last June. So there definitely, before also thinking what more we should really have, without disagreeing, but we should really pass the message that this is very important and it's really the other side of the coin of implementation, and these are meant to be true investment plans, so they should be coming.
Working on it, promise.
Noted.
Okay, we'll take a few more questions in a moment. I think let's spend the last sort of 10-15 minutes. Let's come back to demand, lead markets. And there was a question, Manon, that came into you because you opened also with a reference to lead markets. What do you include under lead markets? Who will pay for the additional price of sustainable products or buildings?
I guess that's it. I mean, that's a discussion that we need to have. I mean, there's what I include in this. At least it's more like I think what we're likely to have as levers on the agenda are going to be like the green, like public procurement directive, and probably like a few more kind of product regulation. Sorry, I don't have the list completely in mind. So honestly, like it's a mix. It's first there's something about minimizing the cost by looking at material efficiency as a big part of it as well. So I think be clear that it's not just the same level or more greener. It does have to be kind of a whole, and the demand side aspect of it is very crucial. And then it's a discussion, like, and that's why like this whole discussion on like doing this across the supply chain. If you took the example of steel, there's of course like the dimension of the car manufacturers, but you can also think about corporate fleets versus like maybe kind of more like individual drivers. These are actual deals that need to be made, but like it's hard to imagine like a solution that is viable without having this kind of dialogue and structured exchange between kind of consumers and employers. So I don't know, it's a mix. I think that's, and I think if you look at some of the portfolios of the commissioner, they very overlap, but my impression is like Teresa Ribera will be the person in charge, and I wouldn't want to have that job in kind of balancing industry and consumer prices, and to balance in a way like kind of local like national or kind of European champions versus like smaller innovators, and kind of open markets versus more protectionism. I don't have the answer. I think it's a framework we'll have to build, but we'll have to be very conscious of it. I think when we started on the Green Deal, in particular like the ETS2 discussions, I think the fact that the impact will be significant on people and households and buildings, I think was a bit of an afterthought. I think the point here is that it does need to be part of the conversation as we drive it through. But whether it's Draghi or Chris just saying it, I think there's also just, it is clear that we're going to need to kind of decarbonize very fast. That's like how we keep our future economy going. That will require more intervention and more investment. The investment, there's different levers. It is going to cost a lot. There's a lot of solutions about, I mean, Pascal Canfin was talking about increasing depths, but I think there's also a lot more to do about the efficiency of the kind of public finance signals we have. There's a lot that can be done in de-risking investment, and we've talked a lot about this already, like the role of the EIB or things like this. And there's actually already like a few things in place in terms of like driving more like private finance, kind of transition finance into these activities that I think we've put like the bricks. I don't think it's necessarily a system that delivers yet, but that's going to be the focus on implementation of like say a few years. It's not just about implementing like the Green Deal policies. It's about reshifting these flows. And I think some of the transition finance policies are very promising and needs to be built on. So sorry, it's just I'm kind of not answering the question. Just to say that's another example of the puzzle where there's probably increased prices for kind of different actors. Well, not increased prices, but like a choice between like who gets like to get to see their prices reducing faster, and where is the investment coming from. And I think there's a lot of solutions, and it's going to be a bit of everything, but we have to be very
talk that through. Do you, Aris, have a sense of who's prepared to pay more for more sustainable cement?
Today, I think it's a difficult question to answer because you're trying to look into 4 or 5 years ahead in terms of some of the projects that we're doing. I think different companies obviously have different perspective on that depending on where they stand. I think that there's a short-term answer and there's a long-term answer to that. I think in the long term, decarbonization is going to cost more, but it's going to cost less than the alternative, which would be an ETS priced into a final product. So I think that's the message that needs to come across. In the short term, I think initiatives like public green procurement or environmental standards built in and more transparent communication about the footprint of some of the products, I think would help a lot to get people to understand what's happening and to make a distinction between these products. Obviously, not everyone is going to be wanting or afford to pay a premium, but we've seen in markets which have nothing to do with cement, in consumer markets and so on, that people are prepared to pay some a premium, which would then be something that we would look to do as well.
Okay. How do we create these lead markets? And you've touched on this, the role of green premiums. Chris, have you got a view on this? Yeah, developing this demand side. How do you see that?
CCFDs. Green procurement by member states. I think this is where public money has a role to play.
Any best practice examples?
Best practice examples.
Anyone doing it well so far?
Well, I think I like the Dutch example. Where they have a very good support scheme. It's called EED Plus. SD Plus. Yes, or 2 pluses. But this is something that really works, I think, and really pushed companies to actually look for good projects. I think this is the best I know in Europe.
Okay. Anyone else have a view on this, the demand side, the role of public financing? We can broaden out in a moment to maybe, coming back to where we started, use of ETS revenues. It's not exactly public financing. And also, the innovation fund and so forth. But specifically on this, the role of public financing and creating ultimately the demand for these products.
I think also, we mentioned the Innovation Fund quite at the start. I think there is a reflection there that is quite important and the further evolution, because it has been quite a successful instrument, and then we really see these different avenues for how to make it even more relevant in the future. Then there is, of course, for the riskiness, as we have said, the role of the EIB also for long-term contracts, giving guarantees to make those happen. And then, as regards lead markets, I think there are already some elements in legislation here and there, maybe not fully as lead markets, but interesting elements being in relation to recent legislation, being on buildings, being also on eco-design for sustainable products. But then where I also see that there is quite some further evolution is also in the context of the Net Zero Industry Act, the consideration of everything that is non-price criteria, being for public procurement, also for auctions. There really the sustainability aspects go also into some of these footprint elements, where we also need to look into the methodologies behind. And there I think what is quite important is also to look into how best to ensure a level playing field, also looking into the methodologies that are behind. So possibly more questions, but maybe some also hints where to look at.
No? Okay. Are there any questions from the floor that we haven't yet answered? Anyone? If not, I have a couple online, but yeah, give you preference. I don't see any. So, well, we'll wrap up in a moment then. I'll give you each, just a minute or two to leave us with, I guess, what you take away from this discussion, and maybe something that, a key action that you can and want to take forward. There was one question that brings us, and we'll just squeeze in at the end, back to, it's probably one for you, Aris, back to CCS, the impact of CCS on the cost per ton of cement, and is that a barrier? Can you give us a...
I think it will depend a lot on the project configuration. I think you have projects that are simpler and projects that are more complex. A project which sits on top of the storage side is obviously a much lower cost project than one that has to take a pipeline and then be recompressed and loaded into a vessel and then taken somewhere else. So I think that is a big differentiator. Cost inflation is a very big issue that a lot of the projects that we're talking to are facing. And obviously the rest of the value chain is a very big topic. So everything that goes downstream of the cement plant, and that's why I was mentioning regulation as an important point, because that would give at least some stability and visibility on a huge part of the cost that we can work with.
With all those caveats, can you give us a sense of
cost?
Of cost, of the magnitude of the
I can tell you they're above the ETS price right now.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think that it's there's some figures that have been also presented at conferences that you're talking somewhere between 120 or 180 plus, depending on the project and depending on where you are. So this is a big gap to fill between where the ETS stands right now and where
that's the cost of carbon, the impact actually on the cost of a ton of
that's a full
cement.
Chain. No, that's per ton of CO2.
Yeah. Do you have because the question was more on the actual cement price, does that?
Well, that would depend a lot on the SCM discussion that we had before. So what kind of clinker content are you talking about in there? So the more, I think the more cementitious you bring in, the lower the impact will be on the total cost of the product.
Okay. And there was one other question on CCU specifically. Is that a viable way forward? So the use of CO2 going forward? Because we spent obviously a lot of time talking about storage and so on. Does anyone have a relatively quick at this stage view on that?
I think it's kind of a given that we also need to do CCU, because CCS will serve decarbonizing certain hard-to-abate industries, but we also have some processes in economy where we use fossil CO2. We need to swap it to non-fossil CO2 to decarbonize everything. So I think that is the next step.
Okay, thank you. Takeaways. Paula, do you want to kick off? Because you're in I realize you're in a tricky situation. We're just at the start. We're kind of in between. We know some things. There's lots we don't know. So what do you take away from today, and sort of what are you looking ahead to?
I think I cannot just pick one thing. I mean, for me, what has been quite interesting is actually to listen to the whole discussion and to take all that with me. One element that we discussed towards the end that I think is important is this demand side, how to bring it also into the clean industrial deal next to the supply aspects, and how to create the right demand also for, let's say, those products coming out of it. But this is maybe just a minor thing. I would rather stay with the full extent of all the different angles that we need to look at.
Yeah, and I guess we don't know anymore about when we're going to see the clean industrial deal. 100 days from the president taking office, 100 days from the new commission. We don't know. Do you know?
I would say that first we need to have the commission in place, but that's my take on it. Not take it beyond that. I would say first 100 days, that's the line.
Okay. Thank you. Manon, I wonder also in your closing if you want to bring in, we're not that far off the next COP in Baku, if you want to, obviously, I realize a lot of, or maybe most large cement companies are headquartered in Europe, but obviously there is a lot of cements being produced elsewhere. Whether you want to, just bring in something of the international dimension as well, and this is a global sector, and is there a space for Europe with whatever it does next here to also ultimately lead a global transition for the industry?
So, I mean, for cement, but more widely, I think there's most of the industrial capacity being built today is in kind of emerging economies, or so we focused more a lot on the domestic dimension, which is crucial, and I think we're spearheading a lot of things here. But we do have to kind of think of the impact it has, and in terms of our kind of access to materials and our competition, but also on decarbonizing like globally. And so I think that's going to be an interesting dimension to consider when we, over the next few years when we build this, where I think there's first, as we define maybe some of the public procurement rules, I think there's sometimes a risk of cutting this off for foreign suppliers. I mean, the US, I think, started a bit that way with really local content requirements. I think in this case, it's a dangerous game. I think it would allow to kind of drive kind of innovation and kind of market access and actually competition in this sector. And again, I think the EU has been very influential in setting standards through this. So I think it's something to consider. I know there's a lot of diplomacy effort, and I think, I forget the name, but there's a cement initiative that was launched at COP28. I think this is also very interesting to look at the global dimension of all of this. And I think there'd be a lot of promising opportunities as well in developing clean partnerships with the rest of the world that also help, I think, with our economic resilience at large. So it's about realizing that even if we're trying to to bring more sovereignty, we are still very dependent on the rest of the world and very exposed. And so I think building a new way of collaborating with partners is very crucial, even for just our own self-interest, but also to drive a managed transition globally. So it's just to say, thanks for the opportunity. There's Baku, but there'll be a lot of opportunities as well going forward. And that's one dimension that we do need to be aware of, even though we had times where the geopolitical situation and the kind of competitiveness crisis, as some put it, I think sometimes force us to look inward. We do have to be aware of our dependencies and our impact as well. So maybe a good note to finish on. Thanks.
Thank you. Rachel or Aris?
It sounds like we have a lot of questions, and also that there's a big opportunity with the Clean Industrial Act coming up. I would plea to the Commission and to the regulators, regulation and policy needs to be clear, actionable, and technology neutral. We need to focus on the goal and not how we have to get there. So that would be, I think, in my opinion, some of the best ways to answer some of these questions that remain open.
So I'm coming out of this with, on the one hand, with a daunting challenge ahead of us in terms of all the things that need to happen, but on the other hand, pretty energized. If you think that I mentioned before, the UK has been thinking about this for 20 years, and I think in Europe we've been thinking about it for less than 5, and you already have a big group of people that is actively engaged. The Commission is engaged. There's commitments in terms of funds, and the commitments in terms of regulation. So. I think it's, I get out with a positive note in terms of, what needs to happen. We're looking very much forward to seeing what the Clean Industrial Act will come up with. And you know, we obviously remain here to make this happen.
Okay, thank you. Chris, you're going to leave Brussels with what this time around?
I've got three points from today's discussion, and I think Rachel just mentioned this clear industrial deal. As I think it's interesting that we've been discussing this before the end of still ongoing Commission, and I thought we pretty much agreed what we need to do with the Antwerp Declaration and similar initiatives. And now when I hear Pascal Canfin, it's like more of the same, really. So I think we still kind of disagree what should be in the clean industrial deal, and I think it will be a very difficult discussion shaping it. So I think that's the lesson number one for me. Yeah.
Where do you see the disagreement when you say that?
Well, I think what I hear is just let's just change the packaging, maybe some marketing, and then just press on, and all will be well.
So press on as we have before.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing changes. Just you
Okay.
know. Lesson number one for me is that we need to provide better pool for products where CCS is used. I think that's kind of anonymous today. And lesson number three is that in terms of CCS, but also wider industrial policy, we need to coordinate and cooperate better internally, but we should also cooperate with countries outside, even with the UK.
Okay, thank you very much. A round of applause for our panel. Okay, you're free to go. Everyone else is not yet free to go. We had a second and final question for you via Slido, and then I'll hand over in a second to Koen Koppenhollis, CEMBUREAU's CEO, to close. Much as we asked our panelists, so the first question we asked you was around the challenge,
I know.
the challenges. This is
liked it,
around,
that's why
well,
it's,
how do we address
we could
them?
use it
What
as
should be the
clear
top
industry.
priority for the new European Commission to support industrial decarbonisation?
Yeah.
And we'll give you a moment to answer that. And while you do that, a reminder maybe, I had the pleasure of chairing as well the launch of CEMBUREAU's updated net zero roadmap, and there are big expectations for the Commission. At least the cement industry has upped its 2030 CO2 reduction ambition from 30%, which is set back in 2020, to 37%, and the value chain emission reduction from 40 up to 50. And introduced a new 2040 ambition, plus a target for 14 million tons of CO2 capture. There was no target for CO2 storage back in the 2020 version of the roadmap. But all of that contingent on these kinds of answers, funding, a lot of green procurement, green public procurement as well, de-risking. Many words that are similar to the challenge words, which makes me wonder if we're moving from question to solution, or whether, as some of the panelists also said, we're left with a lot of questions at the moment and a need for discussion still. I'm going to hand over to Koen, however, to make those links for you and leave you with a sense of what all this boils down to.
Okay, that's a good task. Hello, everybody, and thanks for being here, first of all. I would like to pull together a little bit of the threads of the discussion today. And maybe I will start with the word that came up in the last presentation, the whole clinker substitution, because actually it points to the fact that when we decarbonize, we have a variety of levers that we can use in decarbonizing. And I think we talked a lot about CCS and CCUS, etc. But it's indeed true that when we look about clinker substitution, it's also part of our agenda, including also alternative fuel use. I mean, a whole range of levers we have to decarbonize. As pointed out by Aris, I think mainly the thing is there also access to the SCMs. And I think that's a core issue. To give you a figure, we're talking about 33 million tons of SCM used today. When we want to go to the 60% clinker to cement ratio by 2050 that we have in our amended roadmap, we're talking about 66 million tons of SCM needed. So I think that's an issue in a market where you have fly ash diminishing, where you have blast furnace slag diminishing. I mean, I'm not saying that it's impossible. It has been verified also externally. We have our roadmap that has been tested and verified externally, but it is a challenge. That's the first thing I wanted to say. Second point, and I think that is coming back to the main part of the discussion today, it was all a lot about de-risking finance, access to finance. A few words about that. I think it's indeed important what has been highlighted today is that we need to de-risk the full value chain when it comes to breakthrough technologies. Carbon capture and use, carbon capture and storage. When you talk about storage, you need the pipelines and the storage operators who also need the business case in addition to the capturing plant. And I think that is where, coming back to a few questions that have circulated, what I'm a little bit missing in the discussion, it is on the European Commission's agenda, but is indeed on the state aid reform and competition reform more generally. And I agree with Chris that state aids, I mean, going from giving something and giving to the countries where basically the deepest pockets are, is a little bit distorting the competition in the European Union. You're right. But actually the competition law should be a facilitator to the decarbonization process. And I haven't really seen too much of that so far. And I must say, when you're talking about, for instance, guaranteeing part of your value chain, making sure that you have a guarantee on insurance for the counterparty risk, that can be an insurance company, can also be a guarantee from the government. If it is a guarantee from the government, then you have a state aid that comes in, and that needs to be approved, and we need to set the conditions. When we're talking about contracts for difference, even if there is not going to be a contract for difference at European level, it's DG Competition that will set the criteria for your contracts for difference. You talked about access to infrastructure and open access. I mean, what do we mean by open access? Actually, we mean by open access the fair and reasonable access to pipelines, to storage sites. I mean, these are oil and gas operators now included in the Net Zero Industry Act. I think it's fair to say that for a project like carbon capture and storage and use, I mean, your infrastructure is what I would call in competition policy terms an essential facility. And the essential facility needs access at fair and reasonable market conditions. So that's what we mean by open access, but these are points where competition law, I think, needs to come in and needs to be a facilitator in the decarbonization process. Good support, I think, also from the policymakers on our request to return part of the ETS money and front-load it into a specific cement fund. I talked to Chris 2 weeks ago, and Chris said, yes, but I mean, sector-specific is a little bit challenging. It may be, but at the same time, we do have the steel sector that has its steel fund from the coal and steel community at the time, and that has the Green Steel project mainly funded by that steel fund. Okay, it's historically based, but it has been done. Batteries, the same. We have in the CBAM legislation a provision that says for the CBAM sectors you need to have dedicated calls. And why do we ask a cement fund specifically? Because if you compare also in competitive bidding processes, you basically have different cost structures, different technologies according to sectors. So that's why we want to be more sector specific. I think access to energy is another point that was mentioned. I think there more can be done also on the development of the grid. If we are developing low carbon energy sources, for every euro of investment in low carbon energy sources, you need €1 additional for the grid development and for the infrastructure development. And I think that is really crucial, is to make sure that you have the market in Europe operating. You may develop as many renewables as you want. If you don't have the grid and you don't have the transmission, it's not going to get there. The other point I wanted to mention is that and you look at the legal certainty and predictability that was mentioned as one of the first points. I think that remains an issue. I mean, I've now been in public affairs for about 24, 25 years. I mean, it's been on the agenda during that whole period. And we need legal predictability, especially in a business that has long investment cycles. I mean, we need to make the investment decisions today. And to give you a few points where we do need legal certainty, it was mentioned by Aris, the 50 million tons in the Net Zero Industry Act is great. It's there, but it's a general objective. Which member state is going to do what in terms of that 50 million? What if the 50 million is not reached? What is going to be the sanction? What is going to be the result? So I think that's one of the points where we need more certainty, we need more focus. Second point is that everybody in the room knows, but our allowances will run out in 2040. No ETS allowances. Now, that's also the reason why we put forward our roadmap in May of this year, because we have a 78% reduction by 2040 for our sector. We're not reaching 90% if that's going to be the objective of the European Union by 2040. And if that's going to be the situation where we no longer have free allowances, that means that we can't be decarbonized by 2040. That's also the message amongst the ambitious message and the positive messages coming out from our roadmap. It's also a realistic message is this is what we can do, this is so far we can go. And the last point on that is also coming back to carbon use. We need legal certainty on the different types of carbon use. I mean, when you look at the fuels now, for transport fuels, there is no certainty about the way carbon use will be treated under the legislation. And there you say, the Commission says, well, we will have CO2 sources from direct air capture and from biogenic. We have made a study that shows, and I think I've said the same thing last year, but we will need between 250 and 420 million tons of CO2. About 75 million tons is going to come from direct air capture and biogenic sources. Direct air capture, to take 1 ton of CO2 out of the air, is 35 megawatt hour. 35 megawatt hour is about 15 years of what a normal household spends on electricity. And that's what is taken, what it needs to take 1 ton of CO2 out of the air. So I think it's the energy requirements that are there that need to be fully scaled. And that comes back to the whole energy debate. Energy markets need to be developed. And then the last point I would like to make is that when you look indeed outside of the European Union, yes, we need to look outside as what best practices we can use. But my end point is the Green Deal and the competitiveness is all going to need execution, and execution at national level. And that's where we need the permitting, the electricity. It's all going to be national debates, so that cooperation between the European Union and the national level needs to be strengthened. And that would be my final message. Thank you, Sonia. And yes, I just wanted to first end the presentation, because that was my wrap-up of the discussion. But I wanted to thank you all for coming. I think it was a great discussion. Thank you, Sonia, for moderating. Thank you to the speakers as well for being here. I think it was a very rich exchange and also good feedback from the room. I want to expressly thank and extend my thanks to the team, the CEMBUREAU team, especially also to Emmanuel and to Bade for guiding this whole process. I think it was not easy indeed, especially over the past days. With some changes in the panel, there was some nervousness around it, but I think we pulled it off. It was a good event. Thank you for your participation. We have today, I think, a very nice day, which means that we're going to open up the room here, and you will have, if all is well, you're going to have the lunch outside, partly inside, because temperatures have been going up to 23 degrees, I understand. So thank you all for coming. Happy to talk to you over lunch, and thank you all for your participation in the discussion.